In front of me today I've got the Pulsar Thermion 2 Pro XP50 LRF. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but this is a high performance thermal imaging rifle scope with some really cool features, and in this video we're going to run through some of the things that make this unit very unique, and I'm going to talk about my experience with it. But first, some context. How did I end up with this beast? Well, I'm no stranger to night vision hunting. There's a whole playlist of hunting with infrared units on my channel, including the old night sights, the ATN X sight, the One Leaf Commander, etc. But my first exposure to thermal was a couple years ago when I had the very cool opportunity of hunting bush pigs in KwaZulu-Natal. I was sent an ATN Mars and I took some time to mount it to my 260 Remington, zero it, and then set up about 50 meters away from a spot where the bush pigs had been coming in regularly on a trail cam and take a couple headshots. We also got a permit to shoot a problem hyena that was killing cattle, but unfortunately we never saw it. Fast forward a couple years, 2022, I'm in Utah with Thane and Vil Simmons. We head out on a night hunt for raccoons and I get an opportunity to try a Pulsar trail. It was such a great experience and I was so happy with what we were able to achieve with the trail that I realized, flip, I'm actually missing out by not having a good thermal unit of my own to hunt with. I did some research, and one of my criteria is that I really needed to be able to range my target quickly and effectively. While in Utah, Thane was able to use Pulsar's range-finding binocs and give me shoot-to ranges, and I was able to hold on the reticle. But much of the hunting that I do is solo, and I needed to be able to range quickly and effectively by myself. Unless you have a very flat shooting rifle, knowing your shoot-to range is the difference between hitting a target and missing entirely. When I found this unit online, it ticked all the boxes, so I actually reached out to Pulsar to see if they'd be willing to send me a unit on loan. They were, so here we are. Let's start by looking at what you get in the box, and there's quite a few little bits and bobs in here. Opening it up in the front, you'll see the usual things sitting on top. We've got a sticker, got a lens cleaning cloth, we've got a quick start guide, which you'll definitely want to read because obviously being a digital scope, there's a lot of menus to navigate and it's not as straightforward to zero as it is with the traditional rifle scope. We've got a warranty card which you can complete, and you've got some information about the Stream Vision 2 app, which is the mobile app that you'd use to access your footage and stuff like that if you want to do it through Wi-Fi. Beneath that is where it starts to get cool. So Pulsar includes a really nice soft case, and the nice thing about this is that you will actually use it. With a more traditional rifle scope, most of the time you mount the scope to your gun and you don't really touch it. With a thermal unit like this, you're probably going to be wanting to use this on a number of different rifles or taking it off your rifle to put your day scope back on. And so having somewhere to put your unit when you're not using it is obviously quite important. But aside from that, there's also quite a few little bits and bobs in here that you wouldn't need with a traditional rifle scope, like cables, charging equipment, stuff like that. So running through all of this, we've got a rubber magnetic eye cup. This is essentially to stop the glare from the screen reflecting off of your face and spooking animals. This is magnetic, so it just literally clips on here and it's not going to come off. I like this thing a lot, but I probably won't be using it a lot. We've got I want to say a turret cap, but this isn't actually a turret. It's a little bit longer than the one that comes on here, and what this is for is basically if you want to use a battery with extra capacity, you can buy aftermarket, you can pop that in there, put your extended battery cap on, and you've got more battery life. So that comes with a scope. We've got an external charging port, so you can plug in a USB cable to this and you can have your battery plugged in here and charging while you're using the unit, actually, because there's a second battery inside here. Or you can buy extra batteries, keep them charging while you're using the unit and just swap them out on the run. So that's really nice to have. And then we've got a USB-C cable which you'll plug into the scope to either charge the batteries directly from an external charging source, or to access data that's saved on here, like videos and photos. And thank you, Pulsar, for including an adapter for USB 2 to USB-C. Being a Mac user with a MacBook that doesn't have a normal USB cable, I'm so glad I don't have to buy this attachment. It's right here on a little lanyard. That helps so much, so that's well thought out. Now let's look at the scope itself. Now the first thing you're going to notice is that the Thermion family is actually built in the form factor of a more traditional rifle scope with a body tube and turrets, etc. Now it doesn't need to be like this. It's an electronic scope. It doesn't need elevation, windage, turrets, things like that. But they've done this for a very good reason. The first reason, I believe, is that people who are used to a more traditional scope will know in the dark how to access certain parts of the scope. So if you're used to reaching for your parallax wheel, you'll know how to get to this knob. If you're used to reaching for elevation turret, you know how to get here. If you're used to reaching for an illumination unit, you know how to reach these buttons, and you can do it without fiddling around. But the most important reason that they've done this is that you can use aftermarket 30mm mounts. The reason this is great is because there's so many aftermarket options that allow for different mounting heights, allow for the opportunity to actually tilt your scope, which on a digital scope allows you to center your reticle and not have your reticle right at the bottom of the viewfinder, which is really helpful. And obviously you can set your cant as well and move the scope forward and backwards in these rings. So what I've done here is I've mounted a one-piece ear attack mount. It's a very expensive mount, but being a quick disconnect mount that's very adjustable, I can actually move this on and off my rifle or move it between different rifles, and it's going to hold at zero. It's not going to shift on me. That's great, because if I want to put this back from, let's say, a centerfire back to my air rifle, I can put it back on my air rifle, mount it in the same spot as before, and I can just select the profile in here that's saved for that air rifle, and my zero will be saved for that gun. So that's why I've done this. And this is also an adjustable mount, tilt adjustable, which means that once again, if I've got this, let's say, on my air rifle where my zero is a bit closer, I can actually tilt this down to 20 or 30 MOA and get that reticle placed in the center of my viewfinder, which, as I said, is a really helpful thing. So don't skimp on a mount, get a good mount with a scope, and you won't regret it. Let's look at some of the features of the scope in a little bit more detail, starting from right at the back. You've got a fast focus eyepiece. On a traditional rifle scope, this would focus your eye to the reticle. On this scope, it focuses your eye to the viewfinder or display. The display itself has a resolution of 1024 by 768. I find it more than adequate, and the colors and brightness are great. The thermal sensor itself has a resolution of 640 by 480 microbolometers. That sounds like a unit that you'd use to quantify how much bolognese is in your spaghetti, but it's actually a way to quantify how much detail the thermal sensor can make out. The scope advertises a magnification of 2 to 16 times. Keep in mind that this is digital zoom, so the image will become quite pixelated when you zoom in. The good news though is that they've programmed this so that the reticle actually zooms in with your image, and what's great about this is that it allows you to see finer details in your reticle. When you're zooming into 8 or 16 times, for example, you can really see those spaces between the hold points on your reticle, and it helps you to pick an aim point a little bit better. Zooming can be done by pressing the plus at the back of the scope here, and pressing it again will take you from 2 to 4 to 8 or 16, sort of jumping between those magnifications. If you want more control of your zoom and finer adjustments, once you've pressed this and brought the zoom feature up, you can then use the side knob over here and zoom in or out like this. But I found jumping between those different settings is much faster, and it does the job just fine. What I personally like to do though is to hold in the zoom button over here, and that takes you to picture-in-picture mode. So your main picture is your 2 times wide field of view, and then you've got a picture-in-picture mode above at 4, 8 or 16 times, and then you can see that detail in there. So you've got both views, and that seems to work really well for me. The other buttons on the ocular piece are range and record. Pressing the range button activates the rangefinder. All you need to do is to place your target in the small box on your screen, and the rangefinder beam was already aligned with this box. According to the specs, this will measure out to about 875 yards, which is further than you would ever need to shoot with a scope. Hitting the record button on the right here will record whatever's on your screen straight to internal solid state storage. So you don't need an SD card or anything like that. And I love this as a YouTuber. You can transfer this to a phone or laptop using the Stream Vision app, but I prefer to keep my Wi-Fi off and use the USB-C cable. It just saves battery. Moving a little bit forward, you'll see at the bottom small text that says made in the UK. That's great. There's a reason that this unit's not cheap. It's a quality unit. Many thermal units nowadays are made entirely in China. I don't know whether there are components of the scope that are made in China or outside of the UK. I know that Pulsar has offices in, I think it's Lithuania or Latvia, and they've got offices in Scotland. And I believe that the majority of the scope is manufactured and assembled in Scotland. You can tell just by picking that up that they haven't cut any corners. There's nothing that feels cheap on here. It's a quality piece of equipment. Moving on to the turret area, there's a lot happening here. And as someone who's very used to traditional scopes, this took a bit of a mental adjustment. Normally, this is your parallax adjustment. On top, you've got elevation. And on the right-hand side, you've got a windage turret for left and right. But on this scope, it's a little bit different. On the right, instead of windage, you've got a USB-C input for charging or transferring data. On the top, you've got the housing for your second battery. And on the left, you've got a combination of a button for selecting stuff and switching between menus, and a knob for navigating your menus up or down. There are two batteries in the Thermion, and this is actually really well thought out. Because this is not an optical system that requires light to be able to pass through this entire unit, there's actually space right over here for a battery to sit. So you've got one battery in the body tube itself, and you've got another battery sitting vertically at the back. And what this allows you to do is to actually hot swap batteries out in the field. So let's say this unit is on right now, and I see my battery's running low, but I don't want to switch it off and switch it back on again. I can actually pop this cap off, take this battery out, swap with another fully charged battery, pop that battery back in, and the unit's going to stay on because battery number one is still powering it. So that's a really cool feature, and I think that's been thought out quite well. I mentioned the menu button on the side here. Pressing this once takes you to contrast, brightness, and sensitivity settings for the sensor, and navigating through these settings allows you to kind of manipulate your image in a way that gets the best detail out of what you're looking at. So for example, by adjusting sensitivity and contrast while hunting out in South Africa, where during the day the rocks can really heat up and at night they start to give off that heat, those rocks can get distracting. So adjusting these settings allowed me to sort of cut out the distraction of those warm rocks and find animals a little bit easier. But that's something you have to play around with, and in every situation you'll be able to change the settings to make whatever you're looking at clear and easy to see. So that's one push on the menu button. Holding in the menu button takes you to the main menu, and there are a whole lot of settings you can change here. The first section of the menu, reticle and zeroing, is probably the most important. You can create a profile here for each rifle, set your zero for each profile, and choose your preferred reticle from the database. There are 10 reticle options. I personally like a simple black mil reticle with a red center dot. Once you've chosen your reticle design, you can choose from 9 different reticle color combinations. So you can make it stand out regardless of what setting you're on, and kind of set it to your preferences. Next, let's talk about color modes. Now, you may have seen different thermal footage with sort of black and white. You may have seen some thermal footage that's got red or yellow or purple or different colors like that. The Thermion has 8 different options to choose from. My favorites have been white hot and red hot. White dot seems to provide the best detail. I can see facial features a little bit clearer, and it's the least distracting of all the modes. But if you're scanning around and want an animal to just jump out at you, red hot is awesome. Just look at how these animals stand out from everything around them. But that's the beauty of a system like this that can be programmed. You've got so many options and you can play around and find what works for you. At the front, we've got a 50mm objective lens with a flip cap. We've got the rangefinding module and we've got the focus knobs, which are on both sides. Now, on the non-rangefinding version, you can focus by turning the entire focus knob in the front, which sits over the objective bell. That's probably a little bit easier to adjust than these smaller knobs, which can be a little bit finicky. But what I like about these is that they are on the left and right side. So whether you're a lefty or a righty, you've got something that you can turn with your hand that you're not using to hold the rifle, and it works very well. The rangefinder does add some weight and size, but in my experience, it is totally worth it. It just makes this unit so much more capable. And there you go, guys. I think that's about it. Good news is I have filmed some hunting with the scope, so hopefully I get around to editing those videos soon. But in the words of a friend of mine that I lent the scope to for him to, take a look at it, it's almost cheating. If you're doing predator control, pest control, or culling, the advantage that this gives you over an infrared unit or over a spotlight is huge. And I honestly don't think I could continue my life without having a thermal unit like this in my arsenal. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing if you did. Thanks for watching.